Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to episode 4 of the Launchpad. I've got two fantastic guests on here today that I'm very excited about. First is Ian Hartitz, and we've also got Jakob Sanderson. Before I introduce Ian, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, I want to apologize to you, Ian. The first show that I ever hosted, I reached out to you. I said, hey, I'd love to have you on my show. You said yes, and I didn't even have a show at the time. So I threw it together. I was doing, and I mispronounced your last name, and it is something that has haunted me for the last few months. Now going on shows as a guest of my own, everybody calls me Dave Kluge. Nobody gets the name right. I know how frustrating that is. So Ian Hartitz, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you introduce yourself, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and what you've got going on right now.
Yeah, man, it's like Cheez-Its, Hartitz, like Cheez-Its. But no, it's actually nice now. People call me Ian for the first really until I graduated college. I was always just called Tits. So it's fine, man. It's all good. So whatever you kind of want to, whatever you do with it. It's funny. We got Rotor Underworld over here. Every time I go on Matt Kelly's pod, the first time, I'm meeting this guy. He's like, hey man, how do you say your last name? And I tell him and he says it correctly. And it's like, all right, cool. And he starts the podcast and he goes, I'm here with Ian Hartitz, like just as much as he could do it. So gotta love Matt. But yeah, check me out on Twitter at iHearted. So of course got the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast doing daily episodes there and have a special edition on Friday with none other than DeAndre Swift. So there, PFF.com and
wow.
Good times.
Are you gonna ask him if he's an A back or a B back?
I did bring that up, and it was it's tough to talk too much like workload with actual players because they don't know, and they're just like, I'll do whatever coach tells me. So, what a disaster though, man! May 20th coach speak at its finest.
Have you interviewed any players before, or is this your first one?
I did T. Higgins. I had Aqib Talib on the podcast during the season. So I've done a few now. They're all so cool, man. I try not to be too starstruck with it because these are the freaking great athletes that we love to watch. But they're all good guys, and I give them the questions before, keep it pretty lighthearted. Always a good time.
Absolutely. And I'm sure Jakob is going to be tuning into that because Jakob is one of the biggest DeAndre Swift truthers that I know out there. He is absolutely in love with the man. So the point of this show is I try to get two guests on, help some people reach a new audience. And Jakob and Ian, you guys are both just fantastic analysts. So I'm really excited to get you guys on here together. Jakob at FFRTDB. Run the damn ball. You can find him there. But why don't you go ahead and let everyone know what you've got working on? I know you're kind of all over the place now. You've been blowing up lately, and rightfully so. So why don't you let everyone know where they can find you?
Man, I appreciate that, Dave. And you're a big part of that early on. So you can find a lot of my work on Fantasy Intervention. You can find a lot of my work on Player Profiler. I'm going to be turning out more and more articles over the summer. For those that don't know, I'm also a law student. So my fall and spring content creation is fairly limited, but my summer content creation, especially coming after first year, is going to be a lot more frequent. So I'm excited about that. You can find me on every Tuesday night with Shane Manila and Chase Vernon doing Dynasty Intervention. And then on Friday, I am 1/3 of the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast with Tom Tipple and Billy Milestone. So that's the main stuff that you'll find me. And I'm pumped up to be on a show with you, Dave, of course, as always, and super pumped up to be on a show with Ian. I mean, you talk about this chain, I guess, in terms of how you make it in the industry. So, a guy like Ian gets to be fanboys to, go and interview DeAndre Swift or T. Higgins. Right now where I'm at, you're my T. Higgins. So that's where it's at.
I just had a show. I was on the Full Tilt last week, and we had a very good time on it. And Jakob and I, I'm very much in the Ezekiel Elliott still has some left in the tank, and he's going to bounce back, and don't give up on him. Jakob Sanderson is in I think Tony Pollard is going to take over in 2021, and we had a very heated debate about that last Friday. So you can be sure to check that out if you want to. Considering the trio that we've got here today, we could probably spend the entire hour just talking about why A.J. Brown should be your redraft and dynasty wide receiver one. We got some A.J. Brown fanboys in the house, but instead, we're going to look into some 2021 projections and talk about some other things as well. So to start it off, schedules were just released last week, and of course, that's the big talking point right now. So I talked to Marcus Grant last week, and I asked him this question. Lauren Carpenter and I, we discussed it on our Tuesday show, but I have the same question for the two of you, and we'll start with you, Ian. How much of a factor is strength of schedule for you?
Very minimum. I try to remember when I'm, in best ball to not do my only 2 tight ends, in the same bye week and that stuff. But I just don't put that much stock into it. I do need to go through them and look a little bit. But at the same time, man, I don't think we do a good enough job. Like offensive lines and defenses, like they're important, but I don't think our ability to kind of quantify that is good enough to worry about it too much. And I think we end up like, when you're playing, what do we say? Start your studs. Like, don't worry about matchups during any given week. Like, it can just all change so quickly and it can just not matter at some point, man. All the usage and the player talent is just so much more important than matchup. Like, even a tough matchup, like if you got a running back against the Buccaneers, if he falls into the end zone twice from the 1 yard line and catches 5 passes, it just doesn't matter, man. And wide receiver cornerback matchups, it's so rare for that to ever happen, more than like best case 50% of the time. So I just think, in general, like, yeah, you want someone with the quote unquote easier strength of schedule. I think we'd all agree with that. But when it comes time to like actually have that be your differentiating factor between 2 players, I don't really let it make too big of a difference.
And that's kind of the camp I'm in. It's not something that I'm going to start adjusting my rankings. And I see that, the Eagles have a soft, strength of schedule. I'm not going to start moving Eagles up on my draft board. I feel like really what this is just, the NFL is just a 365-day media machine. And there's that lull in between the draft and in between camp starting up. So they're like, hey, let's release the schedule and give them something to talk about. That's my take. But what do you think, Jacob? I mean, is this something that you're putting in and waiting at all in your projections or your rankings?
Not much. I mean, I appreciate it, right? I do 2 podcasts a week and I have air to fill. So anytime that there's something I can talk about, I appreciate the NFL giving me that content. But no, it's not a big deal. I mean, to me, it's kind of a house of cards. It's like Ian mentioned. We know that there's things about it that matter, but we don't necessarily know how much it's signal versus how much it's noise. And we can't necessarily predict the things that are actually going to matter, right? So defensive efficiency, particularly Hermsmeyer from 538, they ran over the DVOA from defenses from year to year to year. The correlation's like 0.09. So the correlation year to year between how good a defense is actually going to be is not very strong. So you can look at it and say, oh man, I don't want to be facing the Steelers in week 15. They're going to have a really strong defense. But we don't know that they're going to have a really strong defense. We don't know how healthy they're going to be. We don't know what the usage is going to be. There's just so many different questions that it's not really something I'd put a lot of stake into for sure when I'm going, especially at the very beginning of the season. Yeah. The extent to which it matters to me is I just want early bye weeks in redraft formats. It doesn't matter as much to me in Dynasty just because, of course, the schedule's going to flip and flip and flip. But the redraft format, I want the early bye week. I want to eat the bye week right away. And then if I have a good record, and I'm going to have a good record, then I'm going to make those trades and get other folks so I can take on their bye weeks later if they're struggling, just so I can maximize the value of my lineup by the end of the year. But that's about it. And it's not like I'm going to be on the clock in round 3 and I'm going to be like, man, do I want Stephon Diggs or do I want Darren Waller? I got to check the bye weeks. Like, no, maybe at the very end, but that's about it.
Yeah, and this year with the the extended week, bye weeks are going all the way out to week 14, and there are 4 teams that have that week 14 bye week, and there are some big names on there. Jacob, I know you're a Colts fan, so anybody with Jonathan Taylor, that's going to be a must-win game. And Jalen Hurts, I've got him projected to have a big season. Miles Sanders, if Devontae Smith or Jalen Reagor could figure it out, there's a lot of big names out there. But overall, I think that we've kind of established that the strength of schedule is somewhat arbitrary. And for me, I look at it, the Jacksonville defense just a few years ago was this elite defense that made it to the AFC Championship game. And then the very next year, they came out with the same exact defense and won 5 games. So it's so tough to predict how these are going to carry year over year. So I want to ask you this question first, but what team do you think makes the biggest improvement and completely throws off this strength of schedule that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, I was looking at just like 2020 win total, seeing like who could maybe just make the pure biggest, wins-loss leap. And, 49ers are just someone that we knew is always kind of weird. They had that number 3, obviously for them to trade up there and get the pick, but for them to be, picking that high as it was and for them to underperform last year, it was just because of quarterback injuries. And now for them to have Trey Lance, even if he is not, as good in year 1 as he might be in the future, him and Jimmy G, if that defense is even remotely close to what we saw in 2019, I think they have a good chance of doubling their win total. The Falcons, man, I'm not buying all this Julio Jones trade rumor stuff. We'll see. Maybe I'll be on the wrong side of history on this one, but I just don't see it happening because you look at at it, man, and if their defense can just be average, I think the offense is still good enough, particularly if they get a nice lift from Arthur Smith, to end up, being back in the top 10 and being in now pretty much like, okay, I know the Buccaneers are running the NFC South, but the Falcons at least can maybe pass up the Saints and Panthers for that number 2 spot. The Cowboys, if their defense, can maybe take a leap, they spend enough draft picks on it. I'm not really betting on it, but either way with Dak, they can win their fair share of shootouts. And then finally, the Cincinnati Bengals, I think, could flirt with like an 8-8 record with a full 17 games. I guess a 9-8 record. We got to start having this freaking headache with this. They could flirt with the average, I think, with the full 17 games from Joe Burrow. So if I had to pick one of those, I would go with the 49ers. But yeah, I think all 4 of them are, trending upwards.
Yeah, and we'll get back to the 49ers in just a little bit, but all 4 of the teams that you mentioned are teams that I think are going to improve massively going into next year. Who are you thinking, Jacob? Which teams do you think are going to see some of the biggest, differences going into next year?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the ones that Ian said. I'd expect every single one of those to improve pretty massively. My first one is going to be the Falcons, and I agree with Ian. I think that the odds Julio Jones ends up actually being traded probably 20 to 30% at most. I don't think it's likely. It just doesn't fit with all the rest of the stuff they've done this offseason, and I think they're a playoff team this year. But going away from the ones that Ian talked about, the Chargers, to me, strike me as a team that's definitely going to improve this year. Justin Herbert flashed a ton. They played a ton of close games last year. So, if you just even out all the bad breaks and the random Charger luck they seemingly get every single year, they probably should have been more of a 9-7 team last year anyways than whatever they ended up. I love their draft. Rashawn Slater is going to be an instant impact player for that team. As well as Asante Samuel Jr. So I think they're in really good shape. I think they actually have quite a good defense, especially if they get Derwin James healthy and back at rolling this year. And of course, that offense puts up a lot of points. So I think the Chargers for sure. And if I have to give one more, they weren't bad last year by any stretch, but I think we're still going to see a 3 or 4 game improvement in the win total out of the Minnesota Vikings. That NFC North is pretty soft. I don't know what's going on with Green Bay. If Aaron Rodgers is not a Green Bay Packer, I don't think they're going to have a winning record this year personally. The Lions, one of the worst 3 or 4 teams in the NFL for sure. Obviously, I love everything that's going on with the Bears long-term with Justin Fields. I don't know if I expect them to be, a 12, 13-win team in the first year. Sorry, Dave. I know that that hurts your feelings, I'm sure. But I
agree with you. It's okay, Jacob. I agree with you.
I'm expecting the Vikings to win that division this year. I really love the Darisaw pick. I love what they did in the draft. I love what they have coming together, and you're going to get a healthy Daniil Hunter as well on defense. So I think the Vikings this year are going to be an 11-win team.
So the one team that wasn't mentioned that I think is going to bounce back in a pretty big way is the Patriots. We saw almost all of their playmakers on defense opted out of the 2020 season due to COVID concerns. They're all coming back right now, and they might have a quarterback change. So we talked about the 49ers a little bit. We talked about the Bears a little bit. And I just mentioned the Patriots, but I want to talk about this because we saw 5 quarterbacks go in the first round. Obviously, Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence, they're going to be the week 1 starters. So then we've got Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones. When do you expect to see these guys take the field in 2021, if at all?
It's absolutely ridiculous that Fields won't be out there week 1, but they want to keep playing this, Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes type Chicago version that they're obsessed with. Never mind that Alex Smith was like an above average starter for 4 years. Like
an MVP candidate the year that Mahomes sat behind him too.
Yeah, and like in the same paragraph, Nagy also admits that Dalton's like a rookie since he hasn't been in the offense before. It's absolutely ridiculous, man. So unfortunately, I could see Fields like not being in there until week 4. That would be my hope at the absolute latest, man, because they're probably going to lose week 1, the Rams. Maybe they can beat the Bengals, but I think if they catch a big L to the Browns, you can get Fields out there for the Lions and the Raiders before you got some actual serious opponents coming up. So I would love to see that. I kind of think Mac Jones wins the job out of the gate. And look, I love Cam Newton, and I was a big truther for him last year. I don't even think he played quite as bad as a lot of people painted him out to be. At the same time, I think you look at just the complete difference in their skill set, and it's just not a type of situation where like Mac Jones, you can't put Mac Jones in the Cam Newton offense. Like I think they just picked the guy at 15th overall, whatever it was, to make him your starting quarterback. Cam, 1-year deal that is really incentivized. I think some reporters have actually talked about he could be a cut candidate. I'd have to look a little bit closer at that, but I do think Mac Jones will be starting from day 1. Trey Lance, I'll go with week 7 after their bye. Historically, you look at top 10 QBs and they start 10 plus games. I mean, there's I think the only example in the last 10 years so he didn't start any games was Jake Locker back there with the Titans. But, just again, history tells us he'll be in there after the bye. We've seen the 49ers kind of make these switches halfway through the season before, and that kind of scenario would get him those 10 games. So Mac Jones, day 1, Fields, week 4, Trey Lance, week 7.
Interesting, because when I looked at the Patriots' offseason moves, it seemed like they tried to build an offense that can succeed with Cam Newton. They went out and got Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, who are both great run blockers, and then they got a bunch of big-bodied wide receivers, which is what really helped him become a better passer in Carolina. So it would be interesting to see them make the switch to Mac Jones, because all the signs this offseason kind of pointed to them wanting to run the heck out of the ball, and they're not going to be able to do that with Mac Jones as much. So that's that's probably going to be the closest one to watch, because I think Garoppolo and Andy Dalton are both going to be week 1 starters, but I think that there could be a real competition there in New England. What are your thoughts on this one, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Fields is going to start sooner rather than later. I don't know exactly how soon. I still think there is an outside shot that actually happens in week 1. I wouldn't surprise me at all. We've seen coaches go back on their words before. They're a bunch of dirty liars. I don't really put a whole lot of stock in whatever they say in May. That being said, if I had a rookie quarterback, I'm not sure that my ideal first opponent is Aaron Donald and the Los Angeles Rams. That seems a little bit aggressive to have your first ever game against the projected best defense in the National Football League. So I wouldn't even be surprised if he's out there in week 2 against the Bengals, honestly. And if they need any help, I would simply contact the Chargers and bring their medical team over to the Windy City. As for the New England situation, I agree with everything that Ian said. I mean, my take on it is that I think it's very likely that the same quarterback plays the entire season, or at least quite a bit of a majority of it, because the skill sets are so different between those two quarterbacks that you really have to build an offense that's completely different around either one. So I think if Cam starts week 1, especially because I think they have quite a good team, if Cam starts week 1, I could see him keeping that job for quite a long time. And I mean, that team, I don't know, Mac Jones kind of fell to them, right? It was a bit of a different situation than what we saw in San Francisco or Chicago, where they traded up to go and get their guy, and especially San Francisco, where it was, months before the draft, and they clearly had quite a concerted plan of how they were going to go about this. I don't think there's any sign that the Patriots knew they were going to get Mac Jones before they went in and did all those free agency moves, right? They didn't trade up ahead of time. They didn't know he was going to fall to 15. So wouldn't surprise me if Mac Jones the week 1 starter. It wouldn't surprise me if Mac Jones the week 1 starter of 2021. But I almost think that or 22. I almost think it's going to be sort of an all or nothing thing. But I think probably, 51% chance I'm with Ian that he starts week 1 of 2021. As for Lance, I think we're going to see a concerted plan. I think that they had a plan of how they wanted to do this when they went up to get him. They had a plan, I think, from the beginning that it was always going to be Trey Lance. They didn't inform us of that plan. I don't think they're going to inform us of their plans now. I think it's probably likely that they have something in the works behind the scenes of how many games Jimmy's going to start, and they're going to bring in Trey Lance no matter what. I think that they're going to have a very competitive team this year, but I don't think that there's any chance that Jimmy's going to play the entire year. One interesting note, though, Week 7, which Ian said, and I've seen that a lot because that's the week after their bye week, that is Sunday Night Football against the Indianapolis Colts. I think it would be very interesting if Trey Lance's first game was against a fellow North Dakota State alum on Sunday Night Football.
Let's go.
Forge in the fire. I would love to see that. I didn't even realize that part of it, but yeah, that would certainly make it a lot of fun. Now to get off specific teams and players, I kind of have a broader question for both of you, because both of you are people whose analysis and processes I really, really respect. And I want to ask a little bit about that. So this whole space is just full of people that have very impressive backgrounds when it comes to evaluating talent. Some people do it through film, some people lean on data, and some people kind of use a mix of both. So Jacob, I'll actually start with you on this one, but I just want to know what kind of sets your process apart and gives you an edge as opposed to other guys in the industry.
For sure. So to me, I think that, there's so many different backgrounds you come into fantasy football, and that's what's incredible is we all end up in this space, but right, it's 2 words, it's fantasy and it's football. And so it's sort of half a game theory type environment and it's half a football environment. And I love football. I've loved football my whole life. But to me, that's not, the number one driving factor. I love any sort of game theory type environment. I love that in economics. I love that playing cards. I love that in fantasy football. And to me, I think that's really the focus of what I bring, because I'm always concerned about that. I'm concerned with what is my value add, because there's no chance I'm going to be able to go out there and grind tape as well as a lot of fine folks in this industry, right? I can watch people, I can study from people, I can know somewhat of what to look for. But at the end of the day, someone like a Ray Garvin or someone like that comes out and says, oh, this guy's really good. Yeah, sounds right to me. They're probably really good. I don't know. When the NFL scouts are drafting players, if they draft them in the first round, chances are they're probably pretty good. And I can do a lot of the analytics work, but at the end of the day, I think what I am able to understand, especially in a dynasty concept, and it's why I really prefer dynasty to redraft, is people need to know what exactly matters. I think that sometimes people get too caught up in the raw fantasy point totals or in the raw talent. And it's like, well, this player, he's being slept on because his ADP is wide receiver 51, but actually I think he's going to be the wide receiver 38. It's like, well, that's a whole lot of doesn't matter, right? Like the reality is, so, my first article, if anyone ever goes and checks it out, it's on optimizing your roster with the Pareto principle and applying economic principles to dynasty. It's figuring out what are the actual portions of your roster that matter. What's the threshold of points that matter? And specifically, to apply this to DFS really quick too, people think differently if you're in a DFS tournament versus a cash game, right? If you're in a cash game, you want to pick safe plays, good plays. You don't have to beat half the field. In a DFS tournament, you're not playing to get to the min cash line. If you just build sort of the optimal lineup, you're maybe you're more likely to get a minimum cash, but only 20% of the field even gets that. So overall, you're going to be losing money. You need to hit the top. And I think people totally disregard that in fantasy leagues. You have a 12-team league, 14-team league, whatever it is. If you're not trying to finish first, then what are you doing? You might feel better about yourself if you finish 6th or 5th or whatever, but you need to finish first. So you need to assume that you're going to hit ceiling outcomes for your players, because you can't get ceiling results without ceiling outcomes. And so you need to be looking at players who provide higher ceiling, because the ceiling matters more than the floor matters. And I think too often people get caught up on risk. People get caught up on the value in a really micro sense, but they forget that macro sense of how is this player going to be a value in a way that actually applies to winning the league, not just outperforming their ADP. And I think in all of my work, that's something that I really focus on, is how does this pick translate to value accrued over time in points and within the market?
That's a great question, or a great response. And Ian, I want to throw the same question to you, but that's going to be a little tough to follow up there. Jacob knocked that one out of the park. But really, I want to know, because you do a little bit of everything. You're doing best ball, redraft, and some dynasty. What kind of goes into your process that you think makes you a little bit different?
Just being obsessed with football my whole freaking life, man. Now that I agree with the whole first or last mindset. I just, right now I'm blessed to be in the position I have been for about 5 years, where I don't have another job other than just supplying fantasy football content. And now especially I've surpassed some of the more grinding work that doesn't consist of writing and just kind of podcasting. So I feel like I have more time than ever to just continue, man, answering all the questions I have, just writing more, talking more every single day, man. No days off. If you want to, I get it. Other people don't have the luxury and everything, but I just think when, basically the whole make hard work a habit thing, I think is true. And I just feel like I've been doing that year in and year out. And the biggest thing I've noticed over the last 2 years, I've started just making sure I watch every single game during the week. NFL Game Pass, they've split it up, they condense it to about 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of time. It's probably, usually last year I was getting it down where, there's the Thursday night game and the Monday night, maybe a couple bye weeks. So on the typical Sunday, I could watch 2 games at 1 o'clock, 2 games at 4, and then the Game Pass games would start getting on at 5, and I'd have that on my laptop. So basically just going through all that, I would finish everything by about 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter of the Sunday night game. And it just saves you a lot, man. I'm not saying I'm able to watch all these close enough to know how good the left guard played in every game and all this shit, but we do just fall in the holes a lot, or people make the mistake of looking at, 2 catches on 5 targets for 10-yard stat line, thinking that the guy was bad. And it's like, no, you need to watch the game. You need to see that he was wide open deep twice and the guy missed him. And I know air yards can help do this, but to me, people want to bark about certain stats. PFF player grades get a lot of shit. Like, not what single stat is perfect. It really isn't, man. And I think we need to watch the actual game to put ourselves in the right position to ask the right questions and start chasing stuff. You see a guy like Kenny Galladay where it seems like every single catch he's making is spectacular. And then we can pull up cool stuff like, oh, I wonder how he ranks in contested catch rate. And like, yeah, he's one of the best guys in the league. That makes sense. We see on the film, we have numbers to back it up. Just like every now and then, even though I think numbers can lie sometimes, you got to look at the film to try to find out when they're telling the truth. So yeah, man, a little bit of everything. And, I certainly do agree with the idea of just, really going for pure upside as we were talking about before. But yeah, man, more than anything, just, be a fan, keep grinding day in, day out.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what Jacob's rankings are off the top of my head, but if you want to talk about going for upside, I mean, I know his dynasty rankings. He's got Jonathan Taylor and Cam Akers up in his, top 3 or 5, way up there, and that's because you're swinging for the upside, and you got to respect it because a lot of people play this game safely, and that's not how you're going to win. But then you mentioned the NFL Game Pass, and I started doing that a few years ago, Ian, and that is just like unlocking a key to NFL. Like, people watch highlights and they watch Sports Center and they see clips on YouTube or whatever, but when you're actually sitting there watching every single game from front to back, it just gives you such a different understanding of the league. You stop parroting other people's opinions and you start making your own conclusions. So yeah, if anybody's got the time to do it, and it is a lot of time, but if you're able to actually sit down and watch every game, I think that's just the best way to get after it in this industry, because then you're making your own conclusions. So we're going to have a couple more game theory questions, a little kind of game strategy questions, and then we'll talk about a few specific players and some situations. But the next one I have, and we hear about like the film versus analytics debate all the time, but another big one is talent versus situation. And I'm somebody who leans pretty heavily on situation, and I find myself drafting crappy players that are in great situations all the time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then we've also seen talented players that don't do well in bad situations. So Ian, start us off with this one. What do you kind of weigh a little bit more heavily when you're looking at your rankings, talent or situation?
Volume, the one that's a mix of both, man. Like it all depends. Like Mike Davis, I think, is actually a lot more talented than other people. You can throw out he didn't average more than 4 yards per carry last year. Neither did a little guy named Christian McCaffrey. So it's, just everything comes into play. But Mike Davis, if he was back on Carolina this year, we would not give a shit about him. He'd just be a handcuff guy, like in the RB50 range. Now he's in Atlanta, and we look at his thighs, and that's great. But if you look at the depth chart, which is what matters, like you can easily talk yourself into him being like top 24 with legit top 12 upside if Arthur Smith, just can't mistake him for, I should say, for Derrick Henry for a couple months. So like, it just depends, man. And I would say a little more like running back, I'm definitely going to pay more attention to the situation and volume. Wide receiver, I think, is a more fair chance to play the more long game with talent, because I just think they have a longer window. You look at guys kind of have their leap years, and wide receivers can continue producing big time fantasy value in their 6th, 7th, 8th years far more often than running backs can. And tight end and quarterback, we actually see much longer, prolonged high end careers as well. So I would say chasing talent more at quarterback, wide receiver, tight end makes sense. And running back, the shelf lives are so short. You got to take advantage of the small windows while you have them. I mean, look, Jonathan Taylor looks great. Todd Gurley looked pretty freaking great like 2 years ago, and now he can't even find a job anywhere. So it's I'm not saying it's going to happen to Jonathan Taylor, but it is crazy how quick some of the guys fall off the mark. But I am happy with a fellow Cam Akers standing here, because we got the talent, we got the situation, and we got the volume for him this year. He's going to ball the hell out.
Yeah, that is just a perfect storm for Cam Akers. And you mentioned 2 guys. You mentioned Mike Davis and you mentioned Todd Gurley. And yeah, Todd Gurley, he put up 9 touchdowns last year on basically one leg. So if Mike Davis is able to go in there and take over that situation, there's no reason that you can't think about him finishing as an RB1, which is wild. Like, he got cut from the Bears 3 years ago for being terrible, and now he could potentially put up back-to-back RB1 seasons. I don't know who saw that coming. Now, Jacob, you and I have had talks about this a lot, and I think, for me, I kind of lean towards the talent side a little bit more in Dynasty and the situation side a little bit more in redraft. But let's hear your take on this one.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, I'm a Dynasty guy first and foremost, so I'm always going to be a talent-focused person as sort of the start of my analysis, right? Because to me, like, my biggest priority is Dynasty. I'm all about prospecting these guys out coming out of college, and having a feel on what I want or what I think these guys are going to be before I even know, what NFL team they're on, right? And so I think it's a totally different scenario between the 2 formats. In Dynasty, and I've done a study specifically on running backs. You can check this one out on Player Profiler. It just does running back talent matter. We look at limited metrics, but specifically, we looked at draft capital, we looked into athleticism, we looked into pass catching ability. And yeah, I mean, at running back, Ian hit the nail on the head. In a short enough window, the situation matters a lot more the specific or supposed talent does at running back in a short window, right? We've all played DFS, I'm sure. When you wake up on Sunday morning and you see the starters got the big red O, and you go, okay, let's see. Oh, I'm gonna play Wayne Gallman today. He's only 4,400, and it's like, yeah, man, we're all on the Wayne train, and no one's kidding themselves. You're not thinking Wayne Gallman is some NFL workhorse, but we all know that if a running back is going to get the majority of the touches, they're going to get some pass game work, they're going to get some goal line work. That's going to work out. The issue is in the long term, I think we're just generally too confident in our ability to project the situation. And I think that the whole idea of running back doesn't matter is a really interesting concept, in my opinion, as it applies to fantasy football, because a lot of times the so-called nerds, and I'm certainly a so-called nerd, I call myself that, we're sort of the running backs don't matter people in real life. And somehow we end up also being the zero RB people in fantasy, where we're chasing the Gaskins and the Davises and whatever. And that makes it so curious to me. Like, to me, the distinction is so clear, where if we accept that running back talent is extremely replaceable, at a lot of different levels, if we accept that you can bring in any guy off the street, and if you give him the rough volume, he's probably going to work out, then to me, that just puts even more of a scarcity on the guys that we actually know are really talented and actually command that opportunity. So to me, like, I just question it with certain guys. I think Davis is actually good. I'm with you, Ian. I've been a fan of Davis back in South Carolina. I think he's better than he's given credit for. I don't think he's like exceptional or whatever, but I think he's at least as good as like David Montgomery. I think he's totally adequate. That's not no shot at David Montgomery, but just, he's a guy that can perform in all phases.
I mean, if you want to set the bar that low at David Montgomery, yeah, there's a lot of guys that are as good as David
Montgomery. Isn't bad, man, when he's running behind the 30th ranked offensive line in yards before contact. Like, he's gaining 3 yards only because he's already got fend off guys a yard back in the backfield. And it was, he doesn't have home run hitting ability. And then he freaking breaks off like 3 50-yard touchdowns. We got to give Montgomery some due. He balled out the last 8 weeks of last year. It's like the RB2. So did Jonathan Taylor, and they both did it against trash defenses. But we really only hold that against Montgomery instead of Taylor. It's too bad that Tariq Cohen's going to take all those targets, and Damian Williams is there for some reason. Now he's going to outplay Montgomery. But I think there's a lot of good
Montgomery. Then why are you worried about Cohen and Williams? If you think he's good, then screw Cohen and Williams.
What do you mean? Cohen had freaking like 100 targets last year.
He's not good. He's like so inefficient.
I know he's not, but Matt Nagy, it doesn't matter what we think. It matters what Matt Nagy thinks.
But coaches, I think coaches are more rational than we give them credit for. Like, I think coaches often respond better than we think that they actually will. And this is it's a tangent, but I just wanted to finish off my last thing. Like, people like fade talent almost. People get so caught up on regression. Like, well, I have to work in an AJ Brown anecdote because I'm on the show with Ian. And like, do you remember last year? Like, AJ Brown was a fade on nearly every reputable fantasy analyst, except for Ian, list last summer, basically because they're like, yeah, he was just unsustainably good. Like, they're like, yeah, his yards per target, his yards after the catch, that's got to come down. It's like, no, actually, if a rookie is like awesome in every isolated efficiency metric you can find, then to me, it's way more plausible that player is going to earn more volume than they're just going to be like, nope, you played 60% of the snaps last year. That's all you're going to get. Your efficiency. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't have a lot of respect for the rationality of NFL coaches, but I do truly believe that if you give them a game-changing talent, they will try to maximize it. I think usually, whether David Montgomery is that type of talent, I don't know, but I think that if he is, then I don't think they're going to throw Cohen out there 40% of the snaps again.
So as somebody who's watched the Bears my entire life, I can tell you that this franchise is going to force feed the ball to Tariq Cohen. They've got him on a $15 million contract, and they're going to have to justify that money one way or another. And the same thing, I feel like this is the same conversation we had when talking about Ezekiel Elliott, that Jerry Jones is going to try to justify that contract by feeding Ezekiel Elliott the ball. And I think the Bears are going to do the same thing. And that's something that I look at a lot. And I probably weigh a little bit heavier than I should. But historically, you see that when players you hear follow the money in so many different circumstances, but sometimes you have to follow the money when you're looking at an NFL roster as well. And, sometimes the more talented players aren't going to get the touches because they feel justified to give the guy that's getting paid big dollars the touches instead. So that's my fear. I think that Ian is right, that Tariq Cohen is still going to end up getting 80 targets this year. And he's going to have those plays where he's just running east and west and picking up 2 yards and not doing anything. That's what Tariq Cohen's done for the last few years. And they just, I mean, the contract last year was just completely unjustifiable to begin with. And then him tearing his ACL a week after getting the contract was just the cherry on top of an absolute awful situation. But yeah, I'm certainly worried that he's going to come in and see another 80 to 100 targets next year. All right, I've got one more question about dynasty and game theory, just a little bit, and then we'll get to some player talk. So something that I'm very against, and I've been tweeting about this a little bit this week, and it's been a little bit of a hot topic this week. It seems like a lot of people are starting to play Dynasty with this like 2 to 3 window outlook, and that's it. They're like, I'm only looking 2 to 3 years in advance. Me personally, I am a magnanimous man of honor. If I'm joining a Dynasty league, I'm playing it with the intent of playing until the day I die. Obviously, it doesn't work out that way, but that's my theory when I'm going into a dynasty league, is that I'm playing for the long run. So I'm wondering how you feel about this. Let's start with you, Ian. Do you kind of buy into this? Like, you should only be looking 2 to 3 years ahead, or are you playing a little bit more long-term than that?
It depends a little bit by player, by position, just like any of these things. Like, zero RB or, freaking, I forget, Belk. What's the new one called?
Robust.
Yeah, robust RB. Whatever it is. Robust, it always depends. And, you just got to be willing to change it when it fits you right. So if I have Patrick Mahomes, like we can have a 10-year window at QB. If I have Jalen Hurts, yeah, I probably would have more of a 2 or 3 year window attitude with it. So I would say in general, unless we're talking, your true quote unquote generational guys like your Mahomeses, I would say, no, I wouldn't try to go longer than 5. It's just hard to predict what's going to happen next year, let alone 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years down the road. I mean, we just really don't know. I mean, like my guy Des Bryant in 2014 has his best year ever, and 3 years later, he's basically out of the league. So it's very tough. And I know we can see some of these coming with guys such as Des, who maybe are just so much more on the athletic side of things versus the technical receiver that like Larry Fitzgerald that can age a lot better and gets moved into a slot and all that. But again, just depends. Normally, I would say I'd take more of a shorter 2 or 3 year window because I'm trying to win every year. Fuck rebuilding. That's a coward's move. We play to win the game, and let's get it going. So I would say more short term. That's probably because when I really got in the industry, it was DFS, and I've always played redraft. I'm only in a few dynasty leagues, and they've all been a little more recent. So maybe I'll learn and evolve over the years, but for now, I'm trying to win right now.
All right, I like it. What's your take on this one, Jacob? I know you prefer the 2 to 3 year window outlook, and why is it?
No, I reject the window. Like I just reject the idea of a window entirely. I think, to me, like, I don't know. The idea of the go for it year, I think that teams vastly overestimate, or vastly underestimate the standard deviation of what your best players are actually going to perform week to week. Like, I think sometimes teams see this as like, I've got Derrick Henry, and I've got Ezekiel Elliott, and I've got Javonte Adams. And it's like, they have all these veterans in their prime. They're like, I'm guaranteed to win. I have the best team. Even if you have the best team in your league, you're probably not guaranteed to win. Like, you probably have like a 30% chance to win the league at most. So to me, the idea of, forcing all of my assets into this one small window in a 12-team league, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I approach my first year in a dynasty startup, no matter what, it's just purely about accruing value. I don't care. It's all about just testing out what the league economy is. So I'll take running backs. I'll take wide receivers. I'll trade every single player on my team for picks. I'll trade all of my picks for players, whatever it is. I just want to build the highest value roster possible. And I'm always looking for value in terms of, I just don't roster players in my core, like in terms of my most premium assets, that don't have a chance or don't have a likelihood of being worth more next year than they are right now. I just won't roster them. Like Derrick Henry, I love you, buddy. You're going to be on all my redraft teams. I'll just never roster you in Dynasty. It doesn't matter. To me, like I will gladly pay up for the mix of youth and production. So like I have Swift, Taylor, Akers, Dobbins, like all those guys on all my teams because I just want those guys who are going to continue to hold their value or improve or at least have a chance to do so, right? I mean, I was all about Miles Sanders last year. Obviously, his value is not what it was last year. So I'm not saying that their value can't go down. I just want to give myself that opportunity to, because I look at some teams and, I have a couple teams where I have all these guys, these prime age, and it's like, man, this sucks. Like if I don't win this year, I know my team's worse next year and there's nothing I can do about it. So if anything, though, I'll backfill. Like the people fall in love too much. So many people, I think, have it wrong. They put all their premium assets are these old veterans. And then all their bench, they're just like, well, I'll just have a bunch of young dudes on my bench and then they'll progress. Most of them won't. most of the guys on your bench fucking suck. Like, I'm sorry, but they do, right? So that's the problem. To me, if anything, I have no problem spending premium assets on the younger guys, and I'll backfill. I'll take on a Julio Jones. If someone wants to give me Julio Jones, I'll take on an Antonio Brown. I'll take on Marvin Jones. Like all these guys that can give me production, I'm spending basically nothing on them, right? So if their value completely dies next year, I spent nothing on them anyways. Anyone at their price range is probably going to die anyway. But if they work, they can give me elite production, and they can backfill, while I'm spending other assets to accrue picks or to accrue youth down the line.
Yeah.
And you hear it all the time in like this talk about like crypto and stocks, people getting stuck holding the bag, and you don't want to get stuck holding the bag when somebody's legs give out from them, whether it be Derrick Henry, Ezekiel Elliott, Todd Gurley, or whoever is going to be the next guy. But let's go on and talk. Am I coming through okay? I think I'm having some connectivity issues. Is everything coming through for you guys?
All good.
It's
all right, cool.
It was a little foggy for a second, but I think we're rolling.
All right, cool. So let's have a talk real quickly about Denver, because Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are both fantastic receivers. There's no doubt about it. And it seems like everybody now is trying to put the wide receiver 1 label on one of those guys. So Ian, I know you're working on some of your projections right now. Who do you have slotted in as the wide receiver 1 in Denver? Is it Courtland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy for you?
Yeah, it's Courtland Sutton. I mean, I'm not going to hold like the injury against him. Really, his knee brace was off in the last picture I saw. And first,
no carry on Johnson.
Yeah, right. For it to have happened week 2 of the season, until I see otherwise, I'm going to treat him as the wide receiver 1 that he's been, man. And look, I think Jeudy, I've seen the route running. I've made the videos about the route running. It's freaking gorgeous. I think he's going to be a great receiver. If we somehow, by the grace of God, get Aaron Rodgers there, like I'm fine lining up both these guys, as our new like Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker type guys going on there. So, but at the same time, man, like we saw Sutton in a similarly, quarterback challenged offense in 2019 just make far more use out of his targets than Jeudy. The drops weren't great. I don't think they're going to be a long-term issue. You look at the, leaders in drops every single year, and you usually just see a lot of really good wide receivers, because if you're getting open that often to drop the ball that much, so it's as a volume stat, I don't think it's all that useful in projecting moving forward. And so I think Judy's really good, but for me, Sutton is the higher end guy. Wide receiver 1 talk for redraft is a little crazy. I think that's in his potential range of outcomes. He's that good. But for me, Sutton's more like as the higher end wide receiver 3, and Judy's just a little bit back, more borderline wide receiver 3. I'm more of a Drew Lock apologist than you'll find out there, man. But it's just not that great of a situation for him. Like their defense is going to be really good. I don't think they're necessarily going to try to just throw the ball all around the yard. And I love the talent they have out there. Maybe Lock or even Teddy Two Gloves, takes a step forward or something. But I'm just, skeptical that the wide receiver 2 in this offense is all that useful in fantasy. They could also finish, behind Noah Fant targets. Wouldn't it be crazy? I wouldn't really project that to happen, but give me Sutton with a small lead over Jeudy.
I think Jacob is going to agree with just about everything you said, but Jacob, why don't you take the floor for a second and let us know what you think about this Denver situation?
Yeah, I agree. I love Sutton. Sutton was my wide receiver 1 in that year's class. That obviously proved wrong. DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley are awesome. But I think Sutton has had a really, really bad rap in the NFL, man. Like that dude came in and, he's basically behind Demaryius Thomas, Manuel Sanders the first year. Ends up gets Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen. Who else did he play with? Did he play with Brett Rippett, Jeff Driscoll, Drew Lock? Just a bunch of jamokes. So it's been nothing but sad days for Courtland Sutton. I prefer Courtland Sutton in all formats. I think it is close. I've seen all these tweets going around say like Jeudy over Sutton, not close. Sutton over Jeudy. No, it is actually close. I like Sutton more, especially if it's Drew Lock, because Drew Lock will throw passes to people that have like cornerbacks paying rent to live on them, and I appreciate that in a quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater, he needs a separator, and Judy's that separator. So this could be a scenario where, depending on who starts, I might have a slightly different answer. But I just like Sutton's ceiling overall, and I think his game is. We saw Jeudy get a lot of vertical work last year. I don't know if that's going to be the case going in with everyone healthy. I think more likely, Judy's going to be the possession receiver in this offense. He's the separator. He's the first down machine. I think Sutton's going to be that, down the field, contested catch, throw the ball up type of guy. So weekly floor, maybe Judy is, better in PPR. Who do I want in my lineup? I want the guy who I think is going to give me 25 to 30 point upside. And to me, that's Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, and I'm with you guys. I don't have too much to add, but I feel like the term alpha receiver just gets abused. Like any receiver that is the potential to be the number one guy on his team is suddenly an alpha receiver. But when you look at Courtland Sutton, like that guy really has the makings to be the next alpha receiver. Like he could be up there as the next Allen Robinson, something like that. 6'4", just blazing speed, can absolutely jump out of the stadium. One of the best contested catchers in the league. So I'm with you. I think that Judy is. He looks like a polished veteran the way that he runs. I mean, he's phenomenal at what he does, but I think that Courtland Sutton has the much higher ceiling, and where I can realistically see Courtland Sutton finishing as a wide receiver one, I don't see that in Jerry Jeudy's range of outcomes.
Now, can we get the Rodgers, please? Can Rodgers go to Denver? It would just be so great.
I wanted Jameis Winston.
Anyone that'll like throw the ball. Like, I mean, I love Drew Lock, but I mean, he's not great. He's not as great as I wish he was.
Bring back Swag Kelly.
He's fun. I mean, he's a poor man's Brett Favre. So I mean,
say
what you want about Drew Lock, but he is at least fun to watch. But man, when Jameis was out there and they hadn't officially signed his contract yet, that just seemed like a match made in heaven. I wanted to see Jameis Winston on the Broncos, probably more than I wanted anything to happen in free agency, and unfortunately, it didn't shake out that way. But let's switch to another team and still have a similar question. And this one might be a little bit further for you guys, but Carolina Panthers, they've got DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. DJ Moore had a couple phenomenal seasons, but then Robbie Anderson came in and supplanted him as the wide receiver one last year. So now heading into 2021, who are we supposed to look at as the better option in fantasy football? Ian, you could start us off with this one.
I'm going DJ Moore, but I have way more Robbie Anderson because I think it's way closer than most people. And I think they're both like low end wide receiver twos, borderline wide receiver twos, man. Like Curtis Samuel left. Okay, that opens up targets, but Christian McCaffrey is back, which is awful for all these guys. And Terrace Marshall is going to arguably be really good there, assuming, his medical stuff is all okay, which I don't think we have any reason to believe it's going to impact his availability in 2021. So, it's a crowded passing game. And I just don't trust Sam Darnold even a little bit. I know the receivers are good. I trust Joe Brady, but my goodness, we have 3 years of Sam Darnold just not being worth even a little bit of a damn. At least Tannehill had some highs when he was playing with Adam Gase. Darnold, we can name his good plays from last year on one hand. I won't go through them, but man, it's bad.
We've seen him. If you go on Twitter, it's the same 3 plays.
Yeah, exactly. The 49ers throwback, the Colts one, the long run, which, all right, we're done. And man, we're done here. But we said it with Drew Lock, PFF has these cool stats, big time throw rate and turnover worthy play rate, just like you sound. It's like it sounds, dropped interception will still be a turnover worthy play, and incredible downfield throw between two guys, a big time throw. Drew Lock at least was, I believe, 7th in big time throw rate. 44th in turnover play rate. That's not good. I understand you can't have that. But Darnold was 38th in big time throw rate and 40th in turnover worthy play rate. He's just bad, man. And I don't think that any real combination of receivers or play calling goodness is really going to elevate the group, man. I would take, I don't know why they assume that Teddy Bridgewater was worse than Sam Darnold. We'll see, man. Maybe, obviously Joe Brady knows a hell of a lot more about football than me, so we'll see. Maybe Darnold is a reclamation project. We hear his age every freaking 6 months, but I'm just kind of out on this passing game and offense other than McCaffrey because I don't really trust Darnold to enable any sort of fantasy relevant receivers.
Yeah, I'll add my thoughts after this, but Jacob, who do you have here? DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson?
Yeah, DJ Moore. I just think he's the better player. I mean, he averaged over 10 yards per target last year. He's always been a really, really strong player. He was a super, super strong prospect, and everything he's done in the NFL, especially the last 2 seasons, splitting targets with other good wide receivers and playing with really subpar quarterbacks, he still managed to be a supremely efficient and productive wide receiver. He just hasn't had the touchdowns. Robbie Anderson said he got more targets last year, but he gets a lot of hollow volume. It was a situation where Robbie Anderson was giving you consistency, but he wasn't getting a lot of end zone targets. He wasn't getting a lot of deep work. Just not really the type of profile that I love. And if you are going to have that type of profile, I really want that profile in, a really good offense with a good quarterback, right? We see a Cooper Kupp type, who gets a lot of that so-called hollow volume, but he actually gets a lot of it, and he gets it from, well, Jared Goff, but he's been an efficient quarterback at times, right? And it's been an efficient offense. Tyler Boyd, similarly last year, he was getting that hollow volume, but it was within a very high volume passing game that was moving the ball, and so it worked out for you. I have a fun Tyler Boyd story for Ian later. But in this one, it's just tough, man. Like, I'm not super interested in anybody in redraft in Carolina. Similar to Ian, I think Sam Darnold sucks. He was bad with Adam Gase. Who wasn't actually that bad with Adam Gase? Joe Flacco. Who else was better than Sam Darnold with Adam Gase? Brock Osweiler. Who else? Matt Moore. Like, these guys are already good. They could still have a little bit of success with Adam Gase. Sam Darnold couldn't because he isn't very good. So I'm all aboard DJ Moore still in Dynasty. As for redraft, I'm fading them both at their ADPs. The only guy I'm grabbing like a best ball is Marshall, just because he goes super late.
Interesting. See, I'm somebody who I'm hoping that Robbie Anderson can get it together. I've been a huge fan of Robbie Anderson since he came into the league, and we saw him when he was with the Jets, and he had that connection with Sam Darnold. Even when Sam Darnold was terrible, it seemed like they still had some pretty good chemistry. And then we saw Robbie Anderson become the focal point of the offense last year. And, you said it, he wasn't really going downfield as much as he was, but the two things that I see are our previous connection with Sam Darnold. I see Sam Darnold getting out of that Adam Gase shadow, which we've seen a lot of people succeed after. And then I see him leading the team in targets. So right now, that's a discrepancy that I see where there's almost a 4-round difference in redraft leagues right now between where DJ Moore is going and where Robbie Anderson is going. So sure, Robbie Anderson DJ Moore might be the slightly more talented player and have a better chance of finishing as the team's top guy. But with the way the value is right now, Robbie Anderson is somebody that I've been picking up in just about every single one of my best ball and redraft leagues that I've done. So I got two guys that I want to talk about before we wrap up here. The first one, specific player I want to talk about, and this is regarding a tweet that PFF sent out with a quote from you the other day, Ian.
Oh, yeah.
And I want you to justify this one just a little bit. You said that you don't think J.K. Dobbins is going to be an RB1. Why don't you try to justify that real quickly, Ian? Let us know why you don't think J.K. Dobbins will be an RB1.
I don't know. The entire public doesn't. He's like the RB17 in ADP right now. I don't understand why people are freaking out about this. Like, he wasn't an RB1 last year. I understand Mark Ingram was pretty great when the Ravens were the number one scoring offense and taking the whole league by storm. But Gus Edwards is back. I wouldn't be shocked if Justice Hill plays some level of snaps like he did down the stretch last year. And when your quarterback is taking 150 rush attempts on his own and not throwing the ball to his running backs, it's a problem. Dobbins is awesome. Clearly, I'm an Ohio State stan. Like, I love the guy. He averaged 6 freaking yards per carry last year. No one's debating how good he is, but like, Gus Edwards isn't bad either. Only Nick Chubb has averaged more yards per carry than Gus Edwards since 2018. And I think there's a good case to be made that you can put a shit ton of running backs in Baltimore and anyone's going to play well. And we see Dobbins being exceptional because he's still even, that much higher than what Edwards and Ingram were able to do. So, but they like Gus. And again, that matters. And we're not the ones deciding how the touches go in Baltimore. I just don't think there's just much telling us that he's ever going to be this 20 touch per game guy. It's going to be him and Gus, and it's not going to be enough Dobbins, unfortunately. So I'm just chasing, the volume over talent. We didn't see big peaks out of these running backs last year. There were 11 total top 24 finishes from Gus or Dobbins, but only 2 top 12 weeks all season long. And one of those was in week 17 and week 11, both by Dobbins. But man, he's like, what we would take Akers, we would take Jonathan Taylor, we would take Antonio Gibson over this guy. Like, people are shocked because they like J.K. Dobbins, but even DeAndre Swift I would take ahead of him because the potential to catch more passes. Like, he's the rookie second year running back RB5. I don't think it's like that hot of a take with it, but it is what it is when PFF throws the one single quote graphics out. Doesn't exactly give you much chance to explain yourself. But I do have an article up on PFF.com more thoroughly explaining my thoughts on the matter.
So I want you to know that I fully agree with you. And the main reason, one thing that you mentioned briefly, but PPR is kind of the new standard. Like, nobody's playing in standard league scoring anymore. And J.K. Dobbins doesn't get those catches at all. And that really, really limits his floor. So, like, the best possible opportunity, I think, for J.K. Dobbins, if he gets a crazy touchdown share, is that he can finish as a low-end RB1 if he's able to get, 15 to 18 touchdowns. So I agree with you. But Jacob, what do you have to say about this? Because I know you love Dobbins. And don't get me wrong, I love Dobbins too, but I'm just not crazy about his situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Like, I certainly have more ranked more highly in Dynasty than I do in redraft, obviously. I mean, that will he be an RB1 thing? It's always like a question of health, right? To me, there's like 16 to 18 guys who, if they play 15 or 17 games, they're probably going to be an RB1, right? Because we know that 5 of them are going to end up getting hurt catastrophically. And so at the end of the day, it's like, he could probably be an RB1, even if he shouldn't be an RB1, in the projection sheet or whatever. So I take that point for sure. I haven't done my redraft projections. Honestly, I doubt he'll be in my top 12. That being said, I do think that he's a really safe play to be a high-end RB2, frankly, because he's just awesome, right? Like, you're going to want to find reasons to put him on the field. I think Gus Edwards is very good too, and I think the system's obviously running back friendly. I think Gus is one of the best values if you're drafting on Underdog right now, especially if you're a 0 RB guy or a fragile RB guy. I'm definitely backing up the Gus bus for sure. But with Dobbins, I mean, first of all, they run a ton. So getting 60%, of the backfield's rush attempts in Baltimore is very different than getting that, in a Cincinnati or somewhere. They're going to run it a ton. Well, how much do they run Lamar this year? We'll see. Obviously, that cuts in a lot. Justice Hill, I think, mostly taking hollow snaps. Like, I don't know how much he's actually going to get touches. I think he's going to come in there in some pass downs. He's going to chip block, whatever. Do your thing, Justice Hill, whatever. It's fine. I mean, he was pretty much on the RB1-2 fringe last year after the bye week. Once they started giving him, in that 50 to 60 snap share range. I think it's more likely that increases than decreases for sure. I mean, the shell of Mark Ingram's no longer there. Dobbins was a rookie last year. He looks phenomenal. He's only going to get an increase. And I think we could see a Chubb-like RB1 season out of Dobbins, where they have tons of game script, tons of overall team volume. And the other thing is, he's a very capable pass catching back. I'm not going to project him to get 50 catches. They don't throw to running backs a lot in Baltimore. But if for whatever reason that changes, he's the guy who's going to get that pass work. It's not going to be Gus Edwards. He doesn't have that profile. So I think Dobbins is a very good bet where he's going in his ADP. And if the situation changes, we know he'll feast, because we all agree he's one of the best running backs in the NFL. He was top 3 in nearly every efficiency metric there was last year.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue with that at all either, because he's a phenomenal talent. I mean, he was arguably like the most fun rookie to watch last year. He didn't do it over the course of a full season, but once he finally got going towards the end of the season and we were able to see what he can do, he was just an absolute blast to watch. Now, let's finish up with one last question, and this is one that I'm sure you guys both get all the time. So for anybody who doesn't currently have A.J. Brown as their wide receiver 1, what's your quick elevator pitch as to why A.J. Brown should be the wide receiver 1. Jacob, why don't you start us off with this, and then we'll close off with Ian.
Look, I mean, I love A.J. Brown. I've loved him since Ole Miss. He was my wide receiver 5 in Dynasty last year and my wide receiver 6 in redraft preseason. I didn't care where everybody else put him. I didn't care what anybody else thought. I just wanted him on every single one of my teams, and I wanted to watch that freaking beast work. I mean, there's not a lot of players that come into the NFL, especially coming in at 21 years old. They post 12 yards per target their first season, over 10 yards per target again their second season. He was a wide receiver 1 last year, playing in just 14 games in a pretty low volume offense, competing with Corey Davis, who's also legit. Both of those guys were in the top 6 in yards per route run, I believe. Both those guys really solid contributors. There's nobody else there. And they lost both their starting corners. So this defense is going to suck. Derrick Henry, I don't think it's this year, but 1 year it's going to start to, climb back a little bit. You can't keep testing the fence forever. Eventually the rafters are going to come through, and the rafters are age in the case of Henry. So there's a lot of signs that point to possibly more volume in Tennessee. And whatever volume there's going to be, it's going to go to A.J. Brown, who's been one of the best wide receivers in the league, and he's still improving, and he played hurt all last year. So he is my wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. I don't know if he's my wide receiver 1 in redraft for sure. It's close between him and Tyreek Hill and Steph Diggs for me. But I'll tell you what, he's the wide receiver 1 in my heart, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he ends up being the wide receiver 1 on my spreadsheet after I go in and manipulate the data to my preferences.
So, Ian, bring us home. Why is A.J. Brown your wide receiver 1?
He's actually my 2, man. I gotta put Devontae ahead of him. I'm
Ooh.
sorry, but just until Aaron Rodgers is
All right,
gone,
well,
man,
let's imagine Aaron Rodgers is traded. Let's imagine Aaron
Yeah,
Rodgers
then
is
okay,
traded. Yeah, then
he's
why is AJ Brown?
Yeah, exactly. There we go. The second Rodgers out of town, AJB is the wide receiver 1. Yeah, man, they didn't do anything to address Corey Davis and freaking Humphreys being gone, like Daz Fitzpatrick. You know that whatever the hell we got, Des Fitzpatrick. Excuse me, whatever the hell we got going on there. We got Des Fitzpatrick and Daz Newsome, man. We got some new names to be learned here, but
yeah, don't learn them too hard.
Yeah, exactly. But no, man, like all the targets and just like the efficiency, man. You just pull up any like yards per out run, yards per target, PFF receiving grade. Every single thing tells us he's a top 5 wide receiver. The only issue has been volume, man. I mean, the numbers he has put up just in the few games where he has had even a little bit of volume. I mean, I'm trying to get to him right now. It's been insane. It's like Calvin Ridley, actually. That's why I was high on Ridley going last year. Yeah. Brown has had 6 career games with more than 8 targets. He went 10 catches, 151 yards in the tutty, 114 yards tutty, 112 yards tutty, 101 yards tutty, 83, 82 yards. He scored every single time. Like it's just ridiculous, man. Like the one knock against him last year was this game against the Colts where he dropped a 70-yard touchdown. Never mind, he had to get open enough to drop that in the first place. And like people were actually debating like not playing him the next time. He just busts a freaking crosser for like 70 again. So, man, like the fact he did all this on like 2 bad knees is even crazier. So hopefully we get a healthier version and a player getting more targets for the first time ever. Absolutely spectacular. And then I would say, yeah, I would probably manipulate my data to get him wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. It's between him and Justin Jefferson, I think.
Those are my top 2 as well.
If you want to make the Jefferson argument over Brown, I'm not going to call you an idiot, but let's go with AJB 1 in Dynasty for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, glad we got to wrap up on that because I know we have some hardcore AJ Brown stands here. You got the show coming up where you're interviewing some players. You got DeAndre Swift. You got to find a way to get AJ Brown out there, man. Even on top of him being an awesome football player, he might just be the coolest dude in the NFL. I mean, like the dude just has, yeah. But anyway, thank you guys so much for coming on, and thank you to everyone that was able to tune into episode 4 of the Launchpad. I love the idea of just expanding people's reach and breaking into some new audiences, and that's what this show is all about and what I hope to provide to my guests. Next week, I'll be joined with PFF's Andrew Erickson, and then Fantasy Pros Brendan Tuma. Andrew's somebody who I've respected for a long time and his analytically forward process. And then Brendan is somebody who took me under my wing when I was brand new in this industry, working the news desk at Fantasy Pros. He's been managing that for years and doing a bang up job over there. So once again, want to thank everybody that was able to tune in today. Hope you enjoy the weekend and have a good one.